In this video, we're talking about...
Last time at the first debate, we had millions of people fact-checking.
Our goal is to offer a platform for all ideas.
You know what? I'm about to say it.
So whenever somebody interrupts me, I'll be like, wait, I was talking. Do not interrupt me.
I'd rather not say, but the answer is yes.
Welcome to Kingdom in Context. The Creator never intended for us to be confused by His words. He gave us His words of life, and He gave them in context, to be understood and beneficial to our walk with Him. This channel's goal is to bring clarity to some of the misconceptions that have formed over time among believers, and taught by others, however innocent and well-intended. The Scriptures make complete sense when we keep them in context of His coming kingdom and His coming King, Jesus the Messiah. If you're blessed by what we're doing with this channel and feel led to support us, visit the video description below where we have a PayPal option, a monthly Patreon option, or a traditional P.O. Box address. Thank you, and remember, context creates comprehension. Welcome, fellow brave believers. This is Kingdom Cast, and I'm Sean, your host. I appreciate you joining us tonight. We're jumping back into our Investigating Babylon series. We're in part 10, but actually this particular sub-segment, if you will, is so large that it's also going to be concluded in part 11. So be sure to check out part 11, which will be next week's episode as well, so you can get the fullness of us breaking down the practices of Babylon, because they are extensive and they are consistent all throughout history, even into today's modern times. So thank you for joining me tonight. I think this is going to be a really fun episode. We already have quite a few people in the chat waiting. Looks like Elias Stewart is here. Welcome back, brother. Aaron Berg, Gilbert Miranda. Let me see. April Lifton, AC, Wildly Unpopular, Sharon Myerin, GR Cleve, Scott McVicker, Joanna Noller. Welcome, everyone. Mr. Bear's back. Shannon Polk Low, Windfeather. Miss Marsha's back. Welcome, welcome. West Blaze Music is here. Welcome. Bobcat's Droid. That's a fun name. Linda Carter's back. Mike K. Gunder. Tora Bear's here. Welcome, everybody. Sean Davis. Welcome. Linda Carter. Jasmine W. Mary Slattery. I think I missed a few guys, but I appreciate you guys all being here. As always, I'm going to go through a few slides in the beginning. We'll kind of go over some of the core material for tonight. If you may have questions, that's fine. Try to hold them until the Q&A. We do a Q&A at the end of every podcast. So if you want a better chance of your question getting answered, I'm not going to make you do a super chat like some YouTubers do, but just wait till the end and then you can ask your question. And that way I can try to answer them and actually see it, so it doesn't get lost in the chat while I'm focusing on the slides and everything. But tonight we are looking at the practices of Babylon. We've been doing an extensive series investigating everything that is Babylon that we see expounded upon in the Scriptures, and there is so much. It's a huge topic that runs throughout the entirety of the collection of Scriptures, and it's something that we deal with in our modern life all the time. And so I have been putting this series together to show you incrementally as we build towards the finale just how much this is still a reality for all of us. So guys, you are still living in biblical times, whether you realize it or not. And we're trying to show you that, if not from the perspective of how we have to deal with the bad guys, basically. So thank you for being here. Hopefully it's been as much of an adventure going through this information for you as it is for me. So this is stuff that I've been studying for many years and trying to put it together in a succinct way for everyone to understand. So you guys are awesome. Let us just jump right into it. Let's get going. because we got some fun stuff to look at here. All right, guys, we're looking at the many practices of Babylon, and as we've talked about, this is kind of the first thumbnail for episode 1, or part 1, I should say. But really, what we're doing is we spent 7 episodes, 7 different parts in the past. We're going to spend 7 in the present, and then 7 in the future. And I think this is only like the third or fourth here into the present series. But the present series, I mean, they're all technically blended together. That's what I show you in every episode. But specifically, just there's certain parts that I do focus on. And the reason why I chose this particular piece of architecture, which is the European Union headquarters, is because this is in modernity. This is a group of people that have got a group of countries that have compiled together to form a union. And the symbol that they chose is a replica of the Tower of Babel. At least this is what most architects and most people that study ancient literature about the Tower of Babel would easily recognize this particular architecture as a version of the ancient Tower of Babel. How interesting that they would actually do that, and they would actually use that design for them getting together to behave as one. So the first thing that we want to look at, guys, is pretty much the head of the satanic goat, right? It's the head of the pentagram. This is the number one way, the number one practice and behavior of Babylon throughout history, all the way up until today, and it's going to continue until the Messiah returns, and he sets right proper governance with kingdom behavior. So until that happens, I'm going to give you a very, very brief overview, guys. This could have been 4 shows by itself, just this particular topic, but I'm going to give you a very, hopefully, succinct and hard-hitting and comprehensive and understandable summary of this idea and how Babylon has used this governmental practice since the beginning, even back into the days of the actual Tower of Babel with Nimrod as the king of Babel. So let's jump into it, and we'll start taking a look here. This is something we've read in previous parts, but it's good for a reminder in this particular episode. It says, "Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man, and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it was through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. He also said he would be revenged on God, and if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers. Now the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod, and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God." This is in Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 4, from ancient Greek-speaking Roman historian Flavius Josephus from the 2nd century AD. So as you guys can see here, there's a couple things in here I want to point out, because we're going to go over this when we step into modernity and how different governments react across the world. But this is the intellectual, the philosophical motivation that how Nimrod tricked the people into building the Tower of Babel. And this is what Josephus believed in his day. That was the common narrative of that. For one, there truly was a Tower of Babel. So this is a 2nd century witness who claimed, yes, there truly was a Tower of Babel. He actually, in his book, he actually cites other historians from different time periods that attest to the same thing. So, deal with that, atheists. You also have this idea of, he actually talked about how he persuaded the people not to ascribe anything to God, but that it was through his means that they were happy, and to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. So it's kind of a weird and roundabout way of explaining that the people were fully in love with their leader. Okay, so Nimrod was the one that had gained their approval, their trust, and their loyalty, and the people believed it was through their effort and dedication to him that procured happiness for them, as opposed to just their own, as opposed to them ascribing it to anything to God. Which why it follows up at the very end of this particular passage in the statement where he says, they esteemed it cowardice to submit to God. And hopefully most of you guys know that it's very easily, that is like a huge thrust of modern day atheist movement and this humanism, secularism, evolutionary style movement was everything is you're brave and you're strong because you are secure in your own future. You don't have to trust the words of the Father and prophecy that he's going to come and make things right and provide for you and take care of you. You don't have to do any of that. Their mantra is the same philosophical concept that we see deceived upon the people during the building of the Tower of Babel, which was to believe in a man as their leader. And this is what's going to make you happy, because this is how it would be cowardly. It would be silly to think that you could ascribe it to God when you have a guy right in front of you here that you can praise and worship, basically. So over time, this went into kings, emperors, and rulers of the land describing themselves as gods and having statues built to themselves that the people worshipped. This was common amongst the Babylonian Empire. We see this literally in the book of Daniel with Nebuchadnezzar. We also see it in history amongst the Caesars in the Roman Empire. So this here is that second century perspective. But let's look here and see in Daniel chapter 4, 28 through 34, we're actually going to see a ruler and emperor also thinking with this terminology that he's the one that created everything, or that he's responsible for everything, and he is forgetting God, basically. So here in verse 28, it says, all this came upon the king Nebuchadnezzar, and at the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. The king spoke and said, is not this great Babylon that I've built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from you, and they shall drive you from men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make you eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over you, until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, and gives it to whomever he wills. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar. And he was driven from men, and did eat grass as an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. And at the end of the days, that's after 7 years had passed, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes unto heaven, and my understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that lives forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. So this is an epic moment here, guys. Nebuchadnezzar has come to Jesus moment, right? If we could put it like that. But he went through 7 years of basically madness and having, mad cow disease or some kind of craziness that literally caused him to go and behave like an animal. I've always wondered if Daniel kind of took over the empire at this point and kind of looked after him from being assassinated from other people who would have see the power vacuum and step in and try to take over. But somehow, some way, that's why I suppose, and I suspect it's Daniel. He didn't lose his kingship, and he gets to come back to rule after going crazy for 7 years, and then getting healed by the Father. But through that, he actually recognizes what Nimrod was deceiving the people to forget, and he recognizes that it's not by his own power that any of this truly happened, and that he was. If you guys have read anything in Isaiah and Jeremiah about Nebuchadnezzar, in the book of Jeremiah specifically, Nebuchadnezzar is referred to as the hammer of the Almighty. The Almighty is saying, I'm going to use the Chaldean, I'm going to use the Babylonian Nebuchadnezzar as my hammer to go and strike judgment on these other nations that have persecuted Israel. So Nebuchadnezzar, before he goes insane, before this time point here in Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar goes out and conquers the entire Middle East, like Egypt, Hittites, everybody, Israel. He takes over. He gets to the point where he grows the kingdom of Babylon to 127 provinces. And we see that as continued as a regional power structure, as a collection of different countries, even into the days of Esther with Artaxerxes, which I believe is the second Artaxerxes. So this was a massive, massive empire that was established and expanded Babylon's rule and behavior greater than even the first Babylon that Nimrod ruled, as far as how far it stretched. So this was a huge moment here with Nebuchadnezzar, for the Father to literally have him come to a point of conversion to some degree, where he's acknowledging the Most High. You have to continue to read the rest of Daniel. You see he makes a proclamation to all the provinces that Daniel's God, Yahweh, is the only true God and the Most High God. So it's pretty fascinating. That is basically a death sentence when you're living in a polytheism society. So here we see in Daniel 8:21, we have an allusion to another incredible emperor throughout history about the 3rd, 4th century BC. This was Alexander the Great. It says the he-goat is the king of Greeks. I put the insertion there, Alexander the Great in parentheses. And the great horn, which is between his eyes, he is the first king. And as for the one that was broken, in whose place there stood up 4 horns, 4 kings shall arise out of his nation, but not in their own strength. So even if you don't, this is a concept that's easily determined from history. This is the only point in history where a ruler of an empire of Babylon was succeeded by 4 rulers instead of 1. And it's through Alexander the Great and his 4 generals, which basically they cut up the empire of Babylon into 4 regions and took over the 4 of them. Excuse me. So this is something that is an easy understanding, an easy point of Daniel chapter 8 to understand from modern history that's well recorded by many, many historians. It's the only point in history that would match anything like this, and all the things match. So I know some people want to reinterpret Daniel 8 through 11 with all types of strange interpretations, but guys, this is the only place in history that this matches for. This is an incredible moment where the empire of Babylon was broken up by 4 people, but this is it was actually established and taken over. The empire was taken over by this Greek, whom was a swift conqueror. And this is the legacy of Alexander the Great. We also see an emperor. And real quick, guys, I'm just going through. Remember, we're looking at the head of the practices of Babylon. So this is their collectivistic authoritarianism. So what is this idea of collectivistic authoritarianism? All right. It's this idea that we're looking at rulers like Nimrod who collected all the people and their resources and ruled over them with an authoritarian manner. That's a fancy term for having an emperor, okay? Because an emperor, he owned all the people and all the land, and he used the resources as he saw fit, basically, okay? This is consistent throughout history until we get into the modern age. I'm going to explain how the enemy flips that and still uses collectivistic authoritarianism, but under a different title, and I'm going to explain that as we go further, so just stick with us. This is Caesar. And this was actually just in the 1st century AD. This was Tiberius, son of Nero. And he said to have command is to have all the power you will ever need. To have all the power you will ever need is to have the world in the palm of your hand. So this is what he thought. He was an emperor. He was a Caesar. This is what he thought rulership was. Everything is under his control. The whole world is his, literally. This is the same mentality that Alexander the Great had as Caesar, that Nebuchadnezzar had over all of the Babylonian province, as Nimrod had before the Tower of Babel fell and everything was dispersed. This is that same mentality. He's controlling everything. So this is a common collectivistic authoritarian mindset from emperors and rulers. And this is just a quick little breakdown, kind of a crude graph, if you will, just to show you from 200 BC all the way to the present age. Empires are prevalent everywhere, all across the world. As you can see, you've got the Parthian Empire, the Romans, the Vandals, the Sasanian Empire, the Mayans, the Teotihuacans, the Byzantines. By the way, the Byzantine is just like the Eastern version of the Roman Empire that split off and continued to reign for over 1,000 years. So the Roman Empire truly is longer than it shows on this graph because the Byzantine Empire took over. Then you have the Holy Roman Empire that sprang up later on around the 9th century AD. Point is, and it goes all the way into the East, the Ming dynasties, the Tang dynasties, into China and different places. Guys, empires, this collectivistic authoritarian rule, what we would commonly just generically refer to as an empire with a king and a ruler. This is a perversion. All of this is a perversion of how God wants to reign with his son as King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the New Jerusalem. And we're going to experience that in the future when the New Jerusalem shows up. But in the meantime, we got a bunch of men who don't know how to do it right? They're very bad at it because they're corrupt. Their hearts are corrupt, right? Greed and wickedness reigns, and impropriety, all types of sin reigns amongst the hearts of men, especially men that are not following after the ways of the Creator. So they're not going to be able to actually properly run an empire like the Son of God will. So this is a huge, but we're seeing this perversion of the kingdom behavior all throughout history, through all these different empires and all these different countries. So it's only in modernity where we've stepped into a very unique transition from this model into a model that still applies the principles of collectivistic authoritarianism, but gives it a different name and kind of flips it on its head. And I'm going to explain that in just a few minutes to you. Okay. So this is where we step into the modern age, and we get to this unique thing that sprang up in the late 1800s after we had 100 plus so years of representative republic formed in the quote unquote new world in America. Over in the old world, you had the rise of socialism and communism. And this was a perversion of, I shouldn't use that term since I already used it, but this is a twist on the collectivistic authoritarianism of empires. But instead of doing it from top down, they're doing it from bottom up. So instead of taking the elite, instead of taking the rulers, and the princes and the dukes and the queens and the princesses and all that, right? Instead of taking that ruling class and having them trickle down all their rule and manage all the resources, you go in and you take the same control of the people, but you tell the people that they're in charge. And you still have complete control of the people. And all of this stuff is designed and bathed in the terminology of revolution. So it's the idea of we're going to take over the ruling class, the oppressors, and we're going to come in with the average people to remove them. But because there's a power vacuum, someone has to step into a place of rulership, like the former ruler, whether he's a king or a prince or a Dutch or an emperor, whomever's been overthrown through revolution, under the guise of supporting the people, is just a way to conquer the established ruling class and set up a new one. This is why we already have over 100 years of real world examples and statistics to look back on, and testimony from people that have come out of these countries, and they see that they have an entire grip on the people, all resources, all industry, and in some severe cases, even their thoughts. It gets all the way down to controlling every facet of the person, because they're nothing but a useful cattle to create an overthrow of revolution. And then the people are subjugated the same, and actually usually even worse. So we're going to get into that as we keep going. Here is one of the proponents of this mindset of collectivistic authoritarianism, who bathed his language in helping the people and being a friend, someone that could help people that are the working class, the quote unquote oppressed is what he would call them, right? So let's see what this guy had to say. He's very famous. His name is Karl Marx. And he says, he lived in the 1800s, but in one of his books he says, in a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith although the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished, after labor has become not only a means of life, but a life's prime want, and after the productive forces have also increased with all around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeoisie right be crossed in its entirety and society inscribed on its banners. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That was the slogan and mantra of communism. And he's basically telling us in this little passage here, once communism has reached its peak value or its peak concept, only then will the full enslavement and subordination of the individual towards his position in the society of labor. Only then will that have happened. And then there'll be no difference between mental and physical labor, because that has vanished. It means that he doesn't have any thoughts beyond what the party, what the communist rulers have told him what he needs to think and do. So there is no individuality there. In fact, it goes on to say, after labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want. So then suddenly the person is now not thinking of his own individual expression or trying to come out and be an entrepreneur or try to do good for his life according to what God's gifted and talented him to do. No, the state in their mind and communistic mentality, the state has already chosen for you everything that you're going to do and what you're going to think. And all that you're going to think about is your labor, because that's going to help the state. Which is why he says it's enslaving subordination of the individual. So, and yes, by the way, many of you understand that he's got that Freemason hidden hand in his coat. We're gonna get to that in a little bit later. We'll do that'll be in a future future episode as far as, you know, secret societies and things like that. But this one we're just focusing on certain concepts. But the whole purpose was, the mantra at the end, it says, after we achieve all these things of enslaving the human and basically making them a cog in the wheel of the machine of communism, of whatever the state needs for them to do, then it can be inscribed on the banners according to his ability, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs, which is a form of equity. And this is a difference in equality versus equity. Equity is taking from those who have the ability to produce more than the person next to them and giving that abundance to the person next to them who can't produce. The whole thing is built off of catering to the person who either refuses to put forth effort or can't, and taking from the person there is no tithe set up. There's no standard set up on how much they would take. They would take it all. You could work and you can make $1 million, and they go, okay, cool, we want 98%. Enjoy the 2%, enjoy your potatoes. Thanks for your faithful loyalty to the state. You've helped a lot of people, comrade. While they take that 98% and they go and they drizzle potatoes over the people that need it, and then they keep 97%. This is literally throughout history, still happening in many places today, but this was throughout history is a proven, historically verifiable destruction of societies as socialism and communism moved into a country and tricked the people to support these political movements to overthrow their current emperors, rulers, duchesses, whatever's. And in America, they're trying to get it to overthrow our representative republic system. So this is the same trick that we see. It's the same philosophical mentality that we watched from Nimrod from the very beginning, from the building of the tower, that we're seeing implored throughout the world for the last 120 years. And guys, it's in a lot of countries. A lot of countries. Here, let me just keep going real quick. So this is Joseph Stalin. He was a Russian communist leader. He lived in the late 1800s to about 1953. And he says, one of his famous quotes, he says, divide the world into regional groups as a transitional stage to world government. And we're going to explain what those groups are here in a few minutes. It says populations will more readily abandon their national loyalty to a vague regional loyalty than they will for a world authority. What does that sound like, guys? Does it sound like, can anyone do the Hunger Games whistle? I'm District 13. What was that? Was it District 12 or 13? I don't know what. I saw that movie like one time. The point is, they were all based into regional districts, and they fought for their region while they were all just ridiculously enslaved and oppressed. He goes on to say, excuse me, guys, I don't know where my voice went. He goes on to say, later the regions can be brought together all the way into a single world dictatorship. So we're going to explain how he breaks people down as a transitional stage to world government, how communism and the mantras and the ideology of communism breaks people down into groups so that later it can be brought into a single dictatorship, and how that's even happening in the United States. We're going to go over some of that in just a minute. Stalin also said, ideas are more powerful than guns. We would not let our enemies have guns while we would let them have ideas. This is total thought control, right? He also went on to say, the press must grow day in and day out. It is our party's sharpest and most powerful weapon. Yeah, a lot of, if you're watching this United States, that kind of sorely hits home. It's like a kick in the nuts, because that's our biggest enemy of our country right now is our mainstream media. They're doing nothing but pushing propagandist communist ideals through different ways, and it's just complete, utter lies they portray on the people to get them to do different political ideas. Super sad. Stalin also says this is one of his goals for Russia while he was the Russian premier. This is something that he claimed, and he actually worked on very hard in Russia throughout the 20th century to accomplish. He said, by May 1st, 1937, there should not be one single church left within the borders of Soviet Russia, and the idea of God will have been vanished from the Soviet Union as a remnant of the Middle Ages, which has been used for the purpose of oppressing the working classes. So do you guys see the flip here? Nimrod told the working classes, all of them who came to volunteer to build the city and the tower, he told all the people it's an affront. It's an affront. And it's a shame. It's cowardice to ascribe anything to God. And what were they going to do with that tower? They were going to go try to make war with God and remove him from his place of authority over them, to make an authority for themselves, to make a name for themselves, as Genesis 11 explains. So in step one, socialist communism takes the people, tricks them, and says, let's overthrow the current leaders. In step two, it says, let's overthrow God. It's the same concept as Babel. It's the same idea that Nimrod portrayed on the people and tricked them. This is why Josephus says that he slowly transitioned the government into tyranny. This is what we've seen happen in the last 50 years in the United States. It's continuing to happen. May the Father change it somehow. This is what we saw happen through the Bolshevik Revolution and through different policies leading up to the Russian Revolution in the early 20th century. This is how it works. This is how the end game of Babylonian collectivistic authoritarianism comes to fruition. It comes to a place where you've overthrown your current leaders. Now you've installed the tyrants who led the revolution and tricked the people. Now the tyrant says, let's overthrow God. It happens this way every single time. Why do you think the Bible is the most banned book in over 53 nations? Something like that. Out of 270 nations, there's 53 of them. All of them are communistic almost. And they all say, no, we're getting rid of the Bible. You know how many people are being persecuted in communist China right now for being a believer? They have to memorize books out of the Bible because they can't actually have one in their possession. It's the same spirit. It's the same concept. It's always been there. And it's the unclean spirits working destruction on the sons of men. We'll keep going. As we said before, guys, this was what Nimrod said to them. It was an affront and a contempt of God. He riles up the people to hate God. Blames God for killing the ancestors for the flood, ignoring the fact that the people that received the judgment of the flood deserved it because they were killing people left and right. This is what's explained to us about the pre-flood era, both Jubilees, Genesis, and First Enoch. So, of course, ignoring context and just saying, oh, God was unjust for killing the flood. Do you guys realize the story of the flood is one of the top 5 contentions of atheists? And many of you guys have seen me, the interview that, I was interviewed by an atheist. It's on the debates playlist on my channel if you want to go watch it after this. But I was interviewed by an atheist, and that was one of the things he kept going back to over and over is how can you justify that God would kill potentially a baby or a 5-year-old in the flood? And I said, well, you don't know that they were actually alive, baby or 5-year-old in the flood. But for one, because it said they were killing each other leading up to the flood, mankind was destroying each other. But 2, you're ignoring the reason why God said he brought the flood. There was evil in men's heart continually, right? There was mass carnage. Jubilees talks about how they were created in the chimeras. They were changing their orders. They were corrupting creation. There was child sacrifice. There was abortions happening like crazy. They were doing ridiculous things. There was mass warfare. A lot of stuff we see today, which is why, Yeshua compares the days leading up to the flood to the days leading up to Yeshua's return. But atheists skip over all of that context and just say, see, God's a horrible person because he killed our ancestors in the flood and drowned the whole world, according to your Bible. This is exactly the mentality, the unclean spirits that sold Nimrod the lie sells the same lie to other people today. It's the same lies. So, in modern times, here in the 19th century, there was Alex de Tocqueville. He's a French aristocrat, diplomat, political scientist, philosopher, and historian. And he says, specifically referring to people that are looking for a communistic, socialistic mindset. Sometimes that mindset can either also be bathed in quote unquote democratic ideas. Did you guys realize that Stalin claimed that their constitution, the Russian constitution, was the most democratic constitution? That's why, guys, a lot of people don't realize the United States has a representative republic. We do not have a democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We live in a representative republic. It's very different. This is why certain political parties in the United States use the word democracy, because that's a communistic idea. It's democracy is mob rule. Communism, revolutions come from mob rule. This is why understanding your history, understanding what country you live in is very important. In the United States, we live in a representative republic. We do not live in a democracy. It's very different. So, speaking about democratic rights and communistic ideals, Alex de Tocqueville, he says, it's not an endless expanding list of rights, like the right to education, the right to healthcare, the right to food and housing. Does that sound familiar, guys? Of what we see in the last 4 years in the United States, what people are chanting in the streets for. He says, that's not freedom, that's dependency. Those aren't rights. Those are the rations of slavery. Hay and a barn for human cattle. And he's 100% correct. When people go out and they're saying everyone should have health care, taxes so we can have health care. They're screaming and fighting for their own dependency and their own slavery. This is the trick of communism. It's an ideological trick upon the minds of people and how they view governance. What they desire for, they don't get it, they try to overthrow it through revolution. This is communism has infiltrated the mentality of a representative republic, and it gets the people to overthrow its rulers, even the ones that they quote unquote voted in. So we have other people. This is a modern day politician from Slovakia. And he actually, he's a psychoanalyst, Dr. Slavoj Zizek, being interviewed in Harper's Magazine in 2011. He spoke on communism, specifically Stalinism. He says, because the horror of communism and Stalinism is not that bad people do bad things. They always do. It's that good people do horrible things, thinking they're doing something great. You mean like telling people that you can't get a job unless you get vaccinated because you're gonna kill everybody? It's good that you actually put poison in your body so that you can be safe for the people around you. Those good people that are tricked into thinking they're doing something great are actually doing horrible things. Or what about, oh yeah, let's go ahead and restrict our ability to do certain industries and to do certain jobs that are not harmful at all because of EPA regulations and Agenda 2030 mixed in with this, climate change agenda in order so that we can save the planet because we're doing something great. So therefore, we're going to oppress other people and stop them from making a living. Instead of letting the market decide what's valuable and what's efficient and what works and what doesn't, instead of let people decide because of interaction and feedback, you're oppressed because someone else tells you what's good and what's not, because they've been tricked and brainwashed into thinking for the collectivistic good. This is the head of the beast. Which brings us right here into Agenda 21. I know that it's been renamed to Agenda 2030. But this is modern politics. This is worldwide politics, not just in the United States. Well, I'm sorry, let me go back here real quick. This is just a few sections of Agenda 21, and I'm just highlighting this right here because of Section 3. We're going to go over Section 3 in a minute when I get there. I'm going to lead up to some other things in between, but the idea is strengthening the role of major groups. Do you remember we talked about earlier from Stalin? He said break the world down into regions, and then those regions are easier to have loyalty to a region, and then later you can bring in a world dictatorship through those regions. Well, that's not just geographical regions, guys. It's political, ideological regions. It's gender, class regions. It's breaking things down into segments of society that causes mass division, to which then later, after everyone's hurt each other and belittled and angered and strife is filled to the brim, you have an overarching dictator come in and control everything. This is divide and conquer. It's just a very sophisticated way to apply divide and conquer. So the major goals of Agenda 21, also called Agenda 2030 at this point, is the abolition of private property. That's 100% communism. That's also empiric rule. That you could have private property, but ultimately it's never really yours. And honestly, guys, I know that there's probably a lot of businessmen watching right now, there's probably a lot of people that are very versed in, law and business, but you probably already know that you truly don't own your property in the United States. No matter what piece of property you buy in the United States, you always have to pay property tax. So you could pay off a $20 million piece of property, and if you don't pay your property tax, they'll come and take that $20 million. They don't give you the $20 million back. They come and take that property because you didn't pay your property tax. The property tax never goes away. So this is something it's a communistic ideal that was infused about 80 years ago into the American political system. And people now are just born thinking it's normal. It's not. It's a communist ideal. So another part of Agenda 21, and this is for all nations, not just the United States, guys. It says the demise of rural living. Homesteaders, are you listening? This is on their agenda. They don't want you living outside of the city. They don't want you being independent, self-sufficient. They also want to do an exclusion of humans from wild areas, also homesteading, independent self-sufficiency. They want the abolition of single-family homes. That means you're being corralled like cattle with other people. Because if you're in a single-family home, no one can tattle on you because you might have greater loyalty as opposed to someone that you're forced to live with in a shared room situation. Who's not your family, who may not know you very well, he's more likely to tattle on you to the state if you're doing something that goes against the agenda. This is a communistic ideal. Government control of food supply, 100% communism, 100%. Collectivistic authoritarianism, specifically. Mandatory birth population control, again, another communist idea. They've been doing it in China for decades. It's horrific. It's horrific. Especially the implementation of how that actually happens. And guys, do not be deceived in the United States if you think that this is not coming to the United States. This is something they're already pushing for. It's literally been happening since Planned Parenthood started. It's a part of the eugenics program. The people that started the United Nations were straight up eugenicists. It's a part of their mantras, their ideals. They slowly and incrementally bring this out in each new generation, stronger and stronger, but they have to get you to ask for it. This is part of the deception. Oh yeah, I forgot I need to pull this up real quick, guys. We're going to watch a little video real quick. Give me 1 second. And it's probably going to get this demonetized, but I just don't care. Because it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. I'm sure many of you may have seen this, but some of you may not. So we're going to watch it real quick. Crazy video. Short video. It's like 2 minutes long. Give me 1 second. Put it over here. Let's turn on the audio. Okay, you guys ready? This is from the World Economic Forum, and this is what they want with Agenda 2030. BS. So stupid. Stupid lies. We're going to cover NASA in a few weeks, guys. Don't worry about it. Cultic nonsense. Yes, the World Economic Forum started specifically by one dude. And this guy is, hang on a second, take this out. This guy right here. Here we go. This is Klaus Schwab. He's the founder and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum. Okay, this is he's the front man, guys. There's other people around, the people that rule the world. They've put this guy up front. You know what I'm saying? Like he's not the only person that has created Agenda 2030. There are lots of governments involved in this because of the secret societies that have infiltrated the actual leadership of these governments around the world. So this is him speaking specifically about the goals of 2030 and what he calls the Great Reset that leads to the 2030 agenda that he hopes to accomplish. And it's the third and final priority of a Great Reset agenda is to harness the innovations of the fourth industrial revolution. There's that word, God, revolution. They tell you right out front what they're doing. You just have to know history. To support the public good, there's that collectivistic mentality, right? To get the people to desire this, especially by addressing health and social challenges. That's exactly what Alex, the French historian Alex de Tocqueville is talking about, right? This is the rights that the people scream for, which is nothing more than their own enslavement. During the COVID-19 crisis, companies, universities, and others have joined forces to develop diagnostics, therapeutics, possible vaccines, establish testing centers, create mechanisms for tracing infections, deliver telemedicine. Imagine what could be possible if similarly concerted efforts were made in every sector. Remember the regions that we talked about, okay? Not just sectors of industry that he's referring to, but if you read the full agenda, like we talked about, which is chapter 3 of the Agenda 2030, Agenda 2021, it's the same type of regional sectoring. It's breaking all of life, moral, social, and governmental and industrial life into sectors that can then be easier manipulated and controlled. So this is what Stalin was talking about in his famous statement. This is what we see broken down into certain parts of Agenda 21 and Sector 3, strengthening the role of major groups. Here is what that actually talks about in Section 3, global action for women towards sustainable and equitable development. Well, suddenly that is broken you into a sector between male and female, between husband and wife. Do you see the division that it puts immediately? Children and youth in sustainable development. Compared to what? Where are the children's parents? What are you talking about? Why wouldn't it be families in sustainable development, not just children and youth? Again, it's further breaking down the child from the parents, because in a collectivistic authoritarianism, communistic state, the state is the father, the state is the mother, and the parents are just the broodmares. Recognizing and strengthening the role of indigenous people in their communities. Now you've broken away indigenous people from the rest of their society around them. So it's no longer integrating people to live in peace around them. It's now you're creating specific recognition of individual ethnicities within the countries. Strengthening the role of non-government organizations, partners for sustainable development, local authorities, initiatives in support of Agenda 21. So now you're going down to a local level in your small city or your medium-sized city or even your small town. They're getting everyone on board with this agenda and the implementations of getting, these groups established through the different forms of industry. Strengthening the role of workers and their trade unions. Sorry, I missed one. 28, local authorities initiative. No, I didn't. I read that one. 29, strengthening the role of workers and their trade unions. 100%, this is a communistic ideal. Strengthening the role of businesses and industry. That's very vague. It doesn't say very much. There's lots of industries to strengthen. Which ones, they'll be deciding which ones get strengthened. Scientific and technological communities. Again, that's where we're going to go into that in a future episode with transhumanism, because they're a part of it as well. Strengthening the role of farmers. And we're going to see that's how they own no private property. Now, you remember, guys, this is all communistic language. This isn't something they're truly trying to strengthen, because like we've already talked about, some of their fundamental goals is they don't want people living in rural areas. And they don't want people living in wild areas. That means everyone's in a city. So who's the farmers? Do you see the contradiction there? The communist language, it all sounds good to begin with. It all sounds great. Oh, we want to strengthen your role in the community. We want to strengthen you as a woman. We want to strengthen you as an indigenous person. We want to strengthen you as a child. Right? This whole thing, guys. It's designed to create division, regardless of the specific words they try to use. This is where the implementation comes from, because they control everything and they create everything as a commodity instead of an independent, autonomous, free will, free thinking individual human that deserves respect. Right? Instead of having an outside standard by which everyone lives through, which is the behavior of the creator, which causes people to live harmoniously, instead of having that, that general premise that everyone can abide by. They want to control how you interact with the people around you, which does nothing but create division inherently, instinctively. So, guys, this is a huge action that many governments want to put on the world. It doesn't mean they've done it yet. They're trying. They're incrementally trying for the last 80 years, but doesn't mean they've accomplished it yet. Okay. So I don't want you to be discouraged. It's just something that you have to know what you're dealing with. You have to know the practices of Babylon so that you can be better equipped to know how to pray, to know how to prepare your heart, your family, your life, your mind, your emotions, all of it. If you don't know your enemy, you'll never know what to do. Okay. So this is why we're reviewing all this stuff. So this is one of the bigger plagues, if you will, on our current society, also in our government right now. And it's called intersectionality. It's something that we're having to deal with. This is a part of this is one of the vehicles in which they create all the groups that we've been talking about. Remember, once they're broken down into groups, they're using control and bringing overall dictatorship into. This is just one of the implementations at a lower level. We're not looking at a macro level. We're looking at a micro level. On a micro level, how do they actually get in and divide people one from another? Intersectionality. It's actually an offshoot of feminist theory. Let's read about it real quick. Intersectionality is an analytical framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create different modes of discrimination and privilege. So right off the bat, it's assuming there's discrimination and privilege. It's assuming. So that means everyone's a target who's a potential offender that's discriminated against you or exhibiting or abusing their privilege in some way that was granted to them. So the whole mindset starts you off thinking that the person next to you, every person that you may run into and meet, is possibly discriminating you or enjoying some form of privilege that you don't have. It goes on to say examples of these aspects are gender, caste, that's your place in society, sex, race, class, sexuality, and religion, disability, physical appearance, and height. Even down to height, guys. It's crazy. Intersectionality identifies multiple factors of advantage and disadvantages. These intersecting and overlapping social identities may be both empowering and oppressing. Intersectionality is a qualitative analytic framework developed in the late 20th century that identifies how interlocking systems of power affect those who are most marginalized in society and takes those relationships into account when working to promote social and political equity. So again, it goes on a hunt for what they view as inequality socially and politically, so that they can now establish what they think, according to their lens that they're viewing social and political activity through, what they think is inequality, so they can write it according to their definition of equity. Equity, guys, is, like I said before, equity is not inequality. Inequality is where two people don't have the same stuff or don't have the same conditions. Equity is what we talked about before, is they take from one to give to the other so that both have the same now. Equity is not how you're treated. Equity is what you have. So this is what Stalin was talking about, and this is what Karl Marx was talking about earlier, where he says according to one's ability and given to the one who has needs, or to each one's ability according to one's needs. So you take from the person that has what he has, and through intersectionality, it takes that mantra, that general premise that there's inequality. That's the assumption of it all, which is a communistic assumption. And it goes into the society, and it looks at all the people groups, dividing them by gender, age, caste, sex, race, class, sexuality, religion, disability, physical appearance, and height. And it says, there's equality here. How are we going to fix it? I'm going to fix it. We're going to create legislation to fix it. And that means we got to create equity, both socially and politically. And so therefore, I'm going to take from the people that we deem to have more, and we're going to give to people that we think have less, according to this particular lens, which inherently creates friction among the people. It inherently causes division, because the whole thing assumes that people are not happy with whatever state in life they have. This is why they have to go tell women, you shouldn't be happy in the home. You don't have equality. They have to lie to women. This is why it literally, if you look it up, and I'm going to explain it here, it's literally a branch of feminism, guys. They tell women that that you shouldn't be happy being a wife at the house and taking care of children. That they lie to women to say that's not good and that's not noble, and they try to claim, oh, you should instead be trying to climb the corporate ladder and make sure that no man could ever do what you do or have your job. And in fact, if he does have a job above you and you're not getting promoted fast enough, well, there must be inequality there. And we're going to make sure that you get promoted faster and that you make just, I mean, you guys have heard the political arguments for the last 20 years. This is where this stuff comes from. And here's the tip of the spear, this lady on the screen. This is Patricia Hill Collins, born in 1948, is an American academic specializing in race, class, and gender. She is a distinguished university professor of sociology at the University of Maryland in College Park. She's also the former head of the Department of African American Studies at the University of Cincinnati and is a past president of the American Sociological Association. So that tells you just how credible the American Sociological Association is. Collins uses a Marxist feminist approach. Guys, these are not my words. These are not my words. This is literally in her bio. This is not me being a bigot. This is not me being hateful. This is not being prejudicial. This is literally in her bio. Okay? It says Collins uses a Marxist feminist approach and applies her intersexual principles to what she calls, there's the phraseology you got to look for, to what she calls the work-family nexus and Black women's poverty. In her 2000 article, Black Political Economy, she describes how, in her view, the intersections of consumer racism, gender hierarchies, and disadvantages in the labor market can be centered on Black women's unique experiences. Considering this from a historical perspective and examining interracial marriage laws and property inheritance laws, it creates what Collins terms a distinctive work-family nexus that in turn influences the overall patterns of Black political economy. So again, even look at where she's getting her theory of her premise for her whole idea is that she's looking at historical perspective. Historical perspective. You know what that's code language, guys. I mean, she's looking at 300 years ago during the slave trade. She looks at historical. Then she looks at, oh, okay, well, what about before women could vote? That was an inequality there. Well, yeah, that wrong got righted over time. United States was not perfect, right? But this is the general premise of all this. They look at the flaws. They don't look at the realities of what's happening today and how things have gotten better over time. No country started out completely amazingly perfect, operating in the kingdom principles as we see expounded up in the Bible. No country has ever done that. So inherently, it's easy. It's low-hanging fruit, if you will. It's easy to go into any nation with this mentality, which is a Marxist view of feminism, to go in and say, we've got one particular class, whether however you want to break it down, race, gender, sexuality, can't even say them all, right? Race, class, sex, gender, religious perspectives, all the different ways they want to break things down. And they're assuming in any country they go to, even in America, they take the history and they say, there's been an oppression here on this group versus this group. There's inequality. How do we change this? Well, what about if those people were already happy? They didn't view it as inequality. They don't want what their neighbor has. They want to create their own life and have their own things. What about that? What about those people? Those people are told to be quiet, that they're bigots and they're hateful and they're racists. Those people are told to shut up, to get out of the way while we make policy that's going to take from you and give it to your neighbor, whether your neighbor wants it or not. So this is a Marxist push within the society, and it's a fancy term called intersectionality. So as you guys saw, this is the second part. There was 5 main concepts: collectivistic authoritarianism, warfare, sorcery, child sacrifice, and weather control. Those are as you saw in the thumbnail, those are the 5 parts. Like I said, we're only going to be able to get to part 1, or I should say subsegment 1 and 2 of part 10. And then in part 11 of this series, we're going to go into the rest of them. But now we're going to jump into part 2. I mean, it's already been a full hour, and I think this part should only be a few more minutes, but that first part was the biggest. I mean, it's so, like I said, I could have spent 8 hours on that first segment there, because I was just giving you a short, brief timeline throughout all of history, all the way up to today, and how it's the same. It's the same governing principles, creating a division amongst the people to then you deceive them to hate God is the end result, and how nations are using that today all over the world. So this is where we jump into segment 2, which is warfare. And that's the warfare is designed to create instability and subjugation. So this is, I'll explain more as we go. So it's in 1 Enoch chapter 8, verse 1. Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony and the beautifying the eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones and all coloring tinctures. So the part we're focusing on here in this is that there was a rebellious angel before the flood that taught mankind how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. Guys, that's used for warfare. That's used for war. It's fighting, okay? Jubilees chapter 10, 1 through 2, and also verse 5. This is Noah complaining after the flood. He's not complaining in a bad way. It's a legitimate complaint. He's praying to the Father and complaining, saying, hey, look, these unclean spirits are still, their bodies were killed in the flood, but these unclean spirits are still here. The spirits of them are still here, messing with my sons and grandsons. So it says, in the 3rd week of this Jubilee, the unclean demons began to lead astray the children of the sons of Noah and to make error and to destroy them. And the sons of Noah came to Noah their father, and they told him concerning the demons which were leading astray and blinding and slaying his sons' sons. So, real quick, the leading astray, that's leading them away from the Creator's behavior into, seducing them into covetous behavior, into all types of, immorality of all types, right? The blinding, that's the terminology used consistently in Enoch and also in Jubilees. And in the scriptures, other places, there was someone that moves away from having your eyes open, which the scriptures calls following the behavior of the Creator, doing the commandments, understanding the law of God, doing the behavior of Jesus. That's having your eyes open. Having your eye blinded is doing the opposite of that behavior, doing destructive behaviors. So this is where he's adding these. This is a part of leading them astray, is blinding them. And also slaying his son's sons. Well, this is where you lead them into this behavior that gets them to kill each other and fight. So warfare had already started up in the generations after the flood, which leads to the Nimrod, Genesis chapter 10, verse 8, how he became a mighty man is because he began to slay giants. Okay, so this is the behaviors of Babylon were already at play in the societies because there were already giants for Nimrod to go and slay. You see how that works? And that's part of what we're going to talk about next week with genetic sorcery. We already did an entire thing on giants in part 3, so we're not going to really focus too much on that form of giants, but we're going to go into other types of genetic sorcery, and we'll explain that next week. So verse 5, Jubilees 10, Noah goes on to pray, and he says, and you, he's talking to God, you Almighty, you know how your watchers, that's the rebellious angels, the fathers of these spirits, acted in my day, and as for these spirits which are living, imprison them and hold them fast in the place of condemnation, and let them not bring destruction on the sons of your servant, my God, for these are malignant and created in order to destroy. They're created in order to destroy. There was mass warfare before the flood, led up to the flood, because of the Nephilim, because of the giants. These are the giants, the Nephilim, the unclean spirits, the demons. They were the sons in physical form before they lost their physical bodies. Now they're just spirits. They were in physical form on the earth as sons of the Watchers who took wives, which was also rebellious. They weren't supposed to do that, which is why rebellion is as unto witchcraft. We're going to explain that as we go next week. So there's a reason that he's talking about this, and he's saying that these are the sons of the, they're still here. Their bodies are dead, yes, but their souls, their spirits, they're still on the earth, and they're causing all these bad things to my descendants. They're causing them to kill each other. This is a part of them being created in order to destroy. They are malignant. 2 Samuel 11, verse 1, and this is how prevalent warfare has been throughout. I mean, when I was preparing this concept, and I was like, all right, well, these people, the people watching, they're going to be like, yeah, Sean, I mean, everyone knows that war has always been happening. But like, guys, it's just not always been happening. Like, there's a lot of people that could be watching this from the United States that have never experienced warfare in their own homeland. Same for, Mexico and Canada. The last, several generations that we've never had to experience war in our homeland. Yes, there may be some veterans watching that have gone overseas to experience war, but a lot of people don't realize other countries, it's a constant thing. We've been very blessed in the United States and North America in general to not have to experience war between Canada, Mexico, and the United States or any invading country in our homeland. I'm not talking about I'm going to go into the different wars throughout time, and I'm not talking about us going overseas. I'm talking about in your backyard. Okay. not since the Civil War. People do not realize how blessed they are to live an entire lifespan of 70 or 80 years and never have to see war with their own eyes. It's irregular to the course of all of human history, all the way back to the days of Jared and Enoch before the flood. Constant warfare. I have on screen here an example of just how constant that warfare has always been, because literally in the description of the introduction of 2 Samuel 11, where David doesn't go to war like he normally would, and he stays home and he sees Bathsheba, and that problem starts. It says in the introduction, then it happened in the spring at the time when kings go out to battle. So this is how normal it was for all of life. Springtime, you know there's a battle coming somewhere, somehow, some neighbor around you, somebody's going to attack somebody. Like that's how constant this was. And this is because of what Noah prayed. It's those unclean spirits that are constantly afflicting the sons of men to lead them astray, to lead them into lawlessness, which always results in warfare. And the warfare creates the instability for the subjugation. Because you've created famine in that region, you've taken away resources, you burned their fields, you killed their animals, you killed their men from the church. The fighting men are also the men that provided for many of the families that did the jobs. So now you've created dependency and subjugation. This is why warfare is a constant, and why human trafficking has always been throughout the entire world forever. And it won't stop until Yeshua returns, as we're told in Joel 3 and Revelation 18. So this is why warfare is a big deal. This is just a quick synopsis, guys, of warfare all throughout history. I mean, I'm just hitting some very brief highlights. That obviously it's continual, it's ongoing through every nation all the time. So it's hard for me to put them all on screen, but just quickly going through some of the highlights. Egyptians versus the Hittites, way back in the day. So constant warfare. Romans versus the Huns over 2,000 years ago. Sorry, guys. The Greeks versus the Persians. It's going to be 2,300 years ago. The Battle of Thermopylae and the whole war, the campaign of the Persians trying to take over Babylon. The Chinese have been at war amongst their own tribes and with other people for a long time. They've been since World War II, they haven't been at war with anybody, but I would not be surprised if that changes soon. The Mongols, the Chinese used to have to fight the Mongols all the time. It was a constant thing for them to be fighting. The Mongols also fought the Japanese all the time. The French, Napoleonic Wars, I mean, they tried to invade all kinds of people. It was just crazy. France went after Russia. France went after England. They went after a whole bunch of people. The English came over to the quote-unquote New World. They came over to North America, constantly battling the Plains Indians of all different types of tribes, constant warfare. American colonials then, over time, do a revolution against the English, try to overthrow their rulers because of various reasons to create what we know now as the United States. Within the United States, American Civil War sprang up, mid-1800s. Horrific internal war amongst the country. We get into the early 20th century. We got World War I starts to happen around 1914. Many nations were involved. This is just one of the nations involved. England still in war because they were one of the. This was at the tail end of the British rule over the entire world, which had been happening for like 400 years. England was still a powerhouse for a long time until America rose up. Germany also, it was included in World War I. As you can see there, the mechanisms of war start to get more sophisticated over time, or at least I should say start to get back to a level of sophistication that the ancients used to have 4,000 years ago. The United States was involved in World War I because there was a lot of countries involved in World War I. That's why it's called World War. Here's just a quick snapshot of World War II. Okay, so this is all the different allies on the left, and then the three Axis powers on the right, and mass warfare, what they called total war of World War II, where basically civilians were fair game as well. It wasn't just military installations or outposts or two armies meeting in the field and fighting each other. It was we'll bomb all your cities, whether it's civilian or not. We'll bomb your whole country. Like, it was what they called total war. It's horrific. So, in addition to the warfare, right? I'm giving you a brief snapshot of warfare, but we're now going to look at some of the mechanisms, some of the what's the word? Some of the ways that these people would have war. Okay, because again, this is consistent practices of Babylon all throughout time. So yes, there's always been war. That's not a big surprise. Okay, and this is like I said, this is a practice of Babylon to create instability, which leads to subjugation of people. Ancient underground cities and ancient underground tunnels, which is where the city sprung up from the tunnels themselves, have been a long-standing practice of military practice that goes back all the way back to the kingdom of Babylon that was spread across the world in the ancient times. So we looked at Turkey. Here's one in Rome. Here's one in Greece called Derinkuyu. This one's a big one. This one actually goes down. This is like a side profile view of Derinkuyu in Greece that they've excavated so far. It's pretty incredible. It goes way down into the bedrock, an entire city, multiple rooms. This is an underground city that's been found in Zibaba, Mexico. This is archaeologists. This is crazy, guys. I don't have any pictures of this one. I can just show you the top of the land. This is an ancient Mayan temple in Tikal, Guatemala. And archaeologists have already mapped 500 miles of underground tunnels under the earth, under these temples. Guatemala is full of pyramidic temples, specifically a Mayan-style ziggurat-style temple. 500 miles, guys. Think about that for a minute. 500 miles of underground temples to Guatemala alone. This is the ancient practices, if you will, of how they would carry out different types of warfare. Here's a modern day. We go to an underground military tunnel in Russia. Still under construction by the time this picture was taken. How about Italy? Go to a modern underground military tunnel that harbors advanced aircrafts. How about tunnel work in Seattle? And a lot of people, you might be saying right at this point, Sean, but yeah, look, that could just be for irrigation in Seattle or a new subway system they put in. Have you guys ever seen the subway? A subway is super small. The actual hole that a subway goes through, very small. It's not, these are giant, guys. These are things you could roll tanks through. Look at the semis behind them. Look at that. These are giant, massive tunnels. This is one of the more famous massive tunneling. This is a military tunnel specifically. It's in Colorado. It's Cheyenne Mountain. It's also known as NORAD. It's an underground military base. Underground military tunnels, underground military equipments. A lot of people would say, but Sean, come on, like, doesn't just, this doesn't mean that that it's that big of, like, it's that prevalent. There's a few underground, military bases. And no, guys, this is happening like crazy. I don't know if you've ever done any research on deep underground military bases. It's the common acronym for them is DUMBs, D-U-M-B, deep underground military bases. They're everywhere. I actually met someone in 2014 whose daughter worked in the deep underground military base underneath Washington, D.C. that was like half a mile down. She said, so this was I met the dad of a woman who had security clearance, and he was telling me the story of like how his daughter would explain and show her badge, and how she would like go in this big elevator. She would go down for like 5 minutes, and then it would stop, and there would be like an entire little community down there. They would have their own barracks where they could sleep for extended periods of time. They have their own shopping area. They have their own recreational area. They have their own cafeteria. And then they had a couple of sub restaurants as well, for different types of dining, but they were all military researchers and scientists in different capacities. And they had these huge bunks and barracks that weren't used, that were emergency, for in case anything ever happened in Washington, and any of the prominent leaders and military had to actually go underground. This is just one of many all across the United States. And there's tunnels that connect them throughout the entire United States. And you might be saying, well, how in the world? I've never heard of this. What are you talking about? You guys want to see the machines they use to drill them? They're literally out in the open. You got one on screen here. This is one of the massive machines that they use to create these massive underground bunkers and bases, these huge tunnels. Look how big that is, guys. Look at the people at the bottom. Those are men with hard hats on at the bottom. This is a huge underground drilling machine. Here's another one. Different types. Different people make them, different companies. Here's overseas, different countries. They have them too. They're everywhere. Here's one being loaded onto a barge so it can be shipped somewhere. And you can see the writing on the boat. It's not an American boat. It's different country. I'm not sure exactly which one this is. I don't understand. I don't know if it's Russian or not. Point is, they're everywhere. This is a common practice. Here's another one. There's another angle of one that's not underground yet. Here's one in a big warehouse, probably getting ready to go out, probably finished construction. Massive, guys, massive. Here's one that's actually been used, so it's dirty, and it's in a tunnel. Massive. From east to west coast of the United States, they've already got tunnels everywhere, underground. Sometimes a mile deep, according to this guy I met and his daughter, who literally works at one of these underground facilities. A mile underground. By the way, the small tremors we have throughout the country, and they blame it on fracking. I don't think it has anything to do with fracking. I think it has everything to do with these. They've been doing this for the last 40 years, and those minor tremors happen all the time in the Midwest. And I would, without a doubt, ascribe those tremors to the underground drilling of these massive tunnels throughout east to west of the United States and north to south for military purposes. Think about it for 1 second, guys. If you were actually under attack and you needed to get your forces from California to North Carolina, would you want to go through all the streets and all the people in all the towns and even on the highways where you might run into weather conditions? You have to cross the Rockies on the top side, right? Run into all kinds of possible weather. No, you would just go a straight shot, straight line through these tunnels underground. No one can stop you. No one get in your way. You can make good time. And you just move as fast as you can. In 2 to 3 days, maybe 2 to 3.5 days, you would be California, North Carolina with planes and tanks and Humvees and all kinds of military vehicles that you might need. And of course, men, right? And they've been safely traveled the whole way in ideal conditions so that they're fresh and they're ready, fed, everything's fueled up. You're ready to go the moment that you come out from the underground to do the fighting at any point in the country you want to go to. It's a military purpose, a military tactic. These tunnels and underground systems were used by the ancients, like I already showed you, all over the place in the old worlds, in the old ancient countries. This is just a modern version of what's going on in our countries today. So this is a guy named Richard Dolan. He's a researcher, and he talks about the military utility for underground construction is obvious. I recall years ago studying the matter in the context of American Cold War military strategy during the 1950s. Motivated by a fear of Soviet missiles striking American installations and cities, military planners recognized the value of secure facilities deep underground. So this guy is called Lloyd A. Duska. He's a former Army Corps of Engineers deputy director. And in 1987, he gave a speech at an engineering conference titled Underground Facilities for Defense, Experience, and Lessons. This is in 1987. Okay. This is like 35 years ago. This guy is talking about his experience and lessons learned from underground facilities. Like that means they've had them for a long time. He says, after World War II, political and economic factors changed the underground construction picture and caused a renewed interest to think underground. As a result of this interest, the Corps of Engineers became involved in the design and construction of very complex and interesting military projects. Although the conference program indicates the topic to be underground facilities for defense, experience, and lessons, I must deviate a little because several of the most interesting facilities that have been designed and constructed by the Corps are classified. Yes, there's, and I'm going to say this with, kind of say this with a grain of salt. Take it for what you will, guys. But there's people that have written books. I didn't have time to actually put all the authors and books and pictures on screen because this takes me time to actually make these slides. But there's people that have written many books about Native Americans that inhabited North and South America and Central America that have taken testimony from these different tribes and the current elders of those tribes, all the way back from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. And these American authors who've interviewed these elders of these clans and tribes, they all have stories about having tunnels underground. And some of them validated the stories of the tunnels in Guatemala, saying they stretched even into Peru and other places down to Argentina, that they're all over South America. And some of them even said that the tunnels went under the oceans to other continents, and that tunnel system was already in place. It was already there, built by the ancients. So you might be asking, well, man, that's crazy. Why would they be doing this? Why would they be doing this way back in the day? What does it matter? Let's look. Amos 9, 1-4. I saw the Lord standing beside the altar, and he said, strike the pillar capitals so that the thresholds will shake and break them on the heads of them all. Then I will put to death the rest of them with the sword. They will not have a fugitive who will flee, nor a survivor who will escape. Though they dig into Sheol, from there my hand will take them. Though they ascend to heaven, from there I will bring them down. And though they hide on the summit of Mount Carmel, I will track them down and take them from there. Though they hide themselves from my sight on the bottom of the sea, I will command the serpent from there, and it will bite them. And though they go into captivity before their enemies, from there I will command the sword, and it will kill them, and I will set my eyes against them for harm and not for good. This is him speaking against other nations, and this is him basically explaining, this idea of why would he say though they can dig to Sheol? Do you guys know where Sheol is? It's a literal place under the earth, under the dirt of the earth. There's a little cavernous area where the soul goes. There's compartments in Sheol, whether you're righteous or unrighteous, and their angels actually guard this compartment of Sheol according to the scriptures. This is where the soul goes to await resurrection. So the creator here in the book of Amos is saying, though they dig into Sheol, from there my hand will take them. That's crazy. Though they hide on the summit of Mount Carmel, that's digging into the mountains and channeling into the rock of the mountains. Even he says, if they try to hide themselves from my sight on the bottom of the sea. We have testimony of ancient clans having dug tunnels under the ocean. It's crazy, guys. Truly, truly crazy. Revelation 6, this is end of days. This is when the Messiah is returning. So this would be a statement speaking about a future time from where we are today. Revelation 6, 12-17 says, I looked, and when he broke the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake. The sun became as black as sackcloth made of hair. The whole moon became like blood. The stars of the sky fell to the earth, and as a fig tree drops its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind. The sky was split apart like a scroll when it's rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth and the eminent people, and the commanders and the wealthy and the strong, and every slave and free person hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide on us from the sight of him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath is come. Who is able to stand? This is incredible. Literally the day of the Lord. What did he talk about? Though they dig into Sheol, from there my hand would take them. Though they ascend to the heaven, I will bring them down. We're going to talk about that in later episodes as well. But this idea that people, the kings of the earth, the commanders, the strong, the wealthy, free persons, slaves, everybody tries to hide in the rocks of the earth. These are tunnels. These are caves. You're going to have angels going through these places and pulling people out, bringing them forth before the Messiah for judgment, which is the Matthew 25:31 sheep and goats judgment. It's amazing. So you guys remember, we talked about this in part 2. We talked about the Vajras. So we're still talking about warfare, right? And the different machinations of warfare. Okay, so we already went over the history of just in general, people have been fighting forever, different nations versus nations, clan versus clan. Then we're going into like some of the actual implementations of warfare. We just went over tunneling and how that's a big component piece of Babylon's practices throughout the world. Now we're going to go into high altitude warfare, which is what we see also in the ancient world and in the modern world leading up to the return of Yeshua. So I'm going to give you a teaser into this right now. We're going to go into it in greater depth as we get into future Babylon and the 7 parts of that series, at the end of the series. But you guys remember part 2, we talked about the Vajras, which was the most powerful weapon in Babylon. It was the ancient Indians, I got a picture of Indra, one of the gods of ancient India, and also Zeus, Greek god, below, showing you, just as a reminder, in case you haven't seen part 2, they both had this weapon. So did other people around the world, other rulers. They both had this weapon, and supposedly it was a powerful device that could not only destroy the enemy in a form of attacking flying machines, but it also had the ability to cause rain and was a symbol of fertility. So it had weather control. We're going to get to that in part 11. I'm going to talk about weather control, but this time, right now, we're going to be talking about the Vajra, supposedly, that this weapon could control flying machines. You guys remember we talked about in part 4, we talked about ancient flying machines. We looked at the various different nations that actually talked about them. They had, their people citing them and saying that the gods used them and that the rulers used them. We went through several different, the Egyptians, the Indians, the Greeks, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, right? The Babylonians. So on the right here, you have a Babylonian flying machine with people up in the top of it. And on the left, and the white schematics, these are the ancient Vimanas from ancient India. And then below it is the boat of Ra that was supposedly flew through the air from ancient Egypt. And then also a similarity to the boat of Ra, another Vimana. This was supposedly a large Vimana. I can't remember the name of it right now. It has a specific name, but this is just an artistic 3D animation rendition to show you of what the ancient Indians believed that their gods flew around in the sky. And that they talked about, both the Greeks and the ancient Indians talked about battles in the sky amongst the gods with weaponry, that they shot arrows at each other and exploded with fire and light. 4,000 years ago, guys. We literally got schematics here from the descriptions. Engineers have put together schematics to show you the different types of Vimanas the ancient Indians used to have. We got hieroglyphs that literally show you the gods flying around in saucer-like crafts. It's crazy, right? We went over all this in part 4. Then in part 5, we talked about this strange place called Mount Olympus. It was considered the home of the gods. Great high altitude. This mountain in the sky where the gods lived. It's consistent. And we're going to get back to, by the way, we're going to get back to this in the future parts, 7-part series of the future Babylon. Because this actually is going to have some importance leading up to the return of Messiah. And I'll explain that later. But right now in our current societies, we see high altitude military activity that spies on its own people and spies on other people for the sake of war and reconnaissance. This is just an example of a United States military drone. People are not in this. These are things that are controlled remotely by other devices, right? So by radio control, basically, if you will. These things are controlled without people inside them. Just like the Vajra controlled flying machines, and there didn't have to be a person inside of it. We actually have something like that today. They're called drones. These are unmanned aerial vehicles. They call them UAVs. These are loosely and generically called drones. Those were a couple of United States drones. Here's a couple examples of China's military drones. They got some different shapes, different sizes. This one looks like a paper airplane you used to make when you was a kid. This is an example from Turkey. Right? I'm not going to go through every country, just to give you quick examples of even smaller nations like Turkey have drones. Okay, unmanned drones. Russia, they've got their own drones. Looks like a seagull. This one looks more like an American unmanned drone. Then you also have high altitude military satellites. Guys, we're in like two or three episodes from now, we're going to go into NASA. Please hold your comments about NASA. I'm going to break down a whole episode just on NASA and all the shenanigans about NASA. But this is a very common military grade satellites that are balloons. We also have high altitude military satellites in the form of Starlink. You guys familiar with what Starlink is? Whole bunch of little balloon activated devices that float in a line. This is many people would say, well, Sean, I thought that was SpaceX. I thought that was Elon Musk is doing Starlink. That's not the military. Did you guys know that Elon Musk gets subsidied up to $4 and $5 billion a year from the US federal government under the military budget? That's how he makes his rockets. NASA gets 22 billion a year. Elon Musk gets 4 to 5 billion a year to do all of his projects. He's subsidized by the government. It's the government. They're just putting it under the guise of a private entrepreneur. It's not. He gets subsidized, guys. A lot of people don't realize that. So that's why he's creating Starlink, high altitude, synchronous satellite objects that are floated by balloons. We also, many people may be familiar with this. I mean, this has been in military use for almost 60 years. This is a U-2 plane. It's a spy reconnaissance vehicle that can, this is the older version. It's actually been retired in the last few years, and we don't have pictures of its replacement because it's, classified. This one, we got pictures of this because it's declassified. It's been retired. It's out of service. It did go up to 70,000 feet. The new one supposedly goes up to 77,000 feet. And we don't have pictures of it to see what it actually looks like. But this thing could be up there for days on end, flying around the earth if it wanted to at 70,000 feet. High altitude military satellites. Keeps an eye on you, just like the all-seeing eye of Ra. We'll go into that later. It's a lot of fun. And then, of course, we have very common to a lot of people. We have advanced military craft. This is actually a picture. I want to have full transparency, guys. Full disclosure. This is not a real picture. This is a picture just from a science fiction movie. But as we went over in our part 4, Ancient Flying Machines, and I went over the modern day military science experiments in that episode about even in the U.S. back in the 1950s, they had saucer-shaped crafts that were flying, and hovering above the ground. They've only gotten better at it. People have testified to it, from military insiders have come out and testified to the fact that they have advanced craft that functions like we would call a UFO, but it's actually just advanced military craft. And I believe it's going to be part of a great big deception coming in the future. We'll explain that further in further episodes. It also has to do with NASA. So this is just an example of also another opportunity. Since these are not built for war, they're built for reconnaissance. This is why they'd be labeled as a satellite. And yes, in part 13 of this long series, we will be dealing with NASA and all their occult nonsense. So just get ready, because I'm going to try to keep a straight face going through all this nonsense. Just pure lies. It's just straight up theft and lies. That's all it is. Just mass deception on the people. Remember what we talked about with Nimrod, where he talked about how Nimrod got the people to think it was courageous to go against God, and it was courageous that they procured, because of what they attributed to their leader, to Nimrod, that they are procuring the means of their own happiness. That same ideological, philosophical push and deception is fostered through programs like NASA. It's just, it's crazy. And I'll explain that when the time comes. But like I said, we were just going over these 2 component pieces of the 5 major ways and practices, if you will, the 5 major practices of ancient Babylon that we see in modern times still happening today. It's collectivistic authoritarianism and also warfare. So hopefully this was an educational and entertaining. If you guys have any questions, put them in all capitalization in the live chat. Put your comment down below if you're still watching at this point. It says that we got quite a few people still watching, so I really appreciate you guys sticking around. Hopefully it was entertaining. If you have any questions, drop them now and I'll try to get to them. Remember to put them in all capitalization. That way I can easily see them and the moderators can easily see them. Moderators, if you're still here, I really appreciate you being here. And let me see here. Looks like we have Sean M. That's I understand your question. That's a very specific part. I only have. This is going to be a 21 part series. So within each series, I only have like a short amount of time. Tonight, I made it like 90 minutes, and that was me taking a whole bunch of stuff out. So these could be 4 or 5 hours each night. People won't stick around for that. I have to make this palpable in some way. So no, I won't be talking about specifically the different types of patches within NASA. We'll make reference to them, but I'm not going to be breaking those down. There's so many other things to break down with NASA that I'll be trying to summarize quickly in that episode. But that's a good question, brother. Royce Bell, what are your thoughts on Elon Musk? He's subsidized by the government. That doesn't happen by accident. He's portraying the deception, like a lot of other people that are in contracted cooperation with the government. So yeah, that's what I think about that dude. Paul the Disciple, no, I believe that Genesis is Genesis, and I don't believe in reincarnation. That's an ancient Babylonian idea that comes actually from ancient India. And actually, the origins of reincarnation is it was only applied to the gods in ancient India originally, and then over time they allowed it to be applied to the people who were good to deserve it. And it was granted to you by the rulers of ancient India because they have a caste system. So it was, that's an idea that comes from ancient Babylon. That's not scriptural at all. I do not believe that I believe Genesis 2:7. So what that means is that you did not live until your soul was created. So Genesis 2:7, dirt of the earth, Spirit of God comes into the dirt of the earth, and your soul's created. Right? So whether it happened in the dirt with Adam or whether it happens in your mother's womb, that spark of life didn't hit you. The Spirit of God didn't hit you until you're zygote in your mother's womb, right? Which is made of the dirt of the earth. I'm trying to be simplistic about it, but so that's when your soul's created. Your soul is you. That's your personality, your mind, your will, your emotions, the collections of things that make you who you are, the things that you'll be judged by. Your soul is you. Your soul was not in existence before the dirt met the Spirit of God, the breath of life, and created your soul. This is the process for how mankind comes into being. So all the angels are created on day 1 of creation. The first man was created on day 6 of creation, and all men subsequent after that are created as dirt meets the Spirit of God. So no mankind lived before Adam was created from the dirt of the earth, and anyone after him through the womb of woman. Does that make any sense? Scripture does not teach that. So hopefully that's a decent answer for you, brother. Bobcat Stroid's asking, do I believe the whore of Babylon in Revelation is the Catholic Church? If not, spoken to this, let me know. Yeah, I actually do think that it's the Catholic Church. To some degree, in a large way, yes. That's why the beast is going to end up turning on the woman. And but yes, I think it's because she's over many people, many waters, many peoples of the sea. She's all over the world, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Empire. And it's just an obfuscation and a deception of the priesthood, Babylon's priesthood, basically. So that's, yeah. Aaron Berg is asking, are you aware of Cory Booker's Justice for Black Farmers bill, land redistribution? No, I'm not, but I'm not surprised because that congressperson is extremely racist. So there's a lot of intersectionality employed there. There's a lot of socialist ideals, communistic ideals, actually, because it's literally just take land from one person, give it to another. So yeah, this is, early 20th century. This is what they did in the Russian Revolution. They went after the farmers first. So this is the fight of our generation, the 21st century, guys. We need to pray for the Father to make strong men who are courageous, who stand up for what's right. And this is the prayer that we should probably all have. Joey Trujillo is asking the simplest solution. Just obey, stop warring against the staff. I'm not sure what your question is, sister. I apologize. We always want to obey. Yeah, you always want to obey the Father. Always keep the commandments. That's how you stay out of trouble. Roy Spell is asking, why does Elon Musk lie? Is it for money, fame? What is anybody? I mean, whether they're deceived or whether they're doing it for money, what is anybody, right? It's because there's corruption, right? There's either brainwashing or there's just straight up, the deception that I was talking about is the same deception that we see all the way back from Nimrod in the Tower of Babel, quoted by Josephus, which is he got the people to think they were doing something great. They were doing something for themselves, that they're doing something good. This is also what we see from the quote that I had from the what's his name? Psychoanalyst Slavoj Zizek, the guy from Slovakia, where he talked about how communism and Stalinism, it's not just getting bad people to do bad things, because bad people will always do bad things. No. Communism and Stalinism, that ideological deception is getting good people to do horrific things thinking they're doing good things. And this is where I would put someone like Elon Musk, right? I think he's been deceived. I think pray for him, right? May the Father open his eyes like he did Nebuchadnezzar. But I think he's been deceived. And I think he's been, personally, if specific testimony that I've heard in a random video was true about what his family believes, then they know the truth, and they've literally raised them to be part of the hierarchy elites that are enacting this plan. So it means he's under great deception from childhood, just like Nebuchadnezzar would have been, right? And so I just pray for people like that, right? Ask the Father to open their eyes, give them wisdom, help them to understand He is the one true God, and that His Son is real, and that His Son will come back, and prophecy is true, that kind of stuff, so that he can not be deceived. But ultimately, just him or anybody like that, most of them are going to be deceived. Very few people, in my opinion, among the elites, don't have. Very few of them aren't deceived. Like they've been told that, they've been convinced that the God of the Bible is fake, that's just told to the people, and that there's truly other gods that are really running the show. They've been deceived. So April Lifton, I'm not sure if you got here late or if, but ultimately throughout tonight's episode, I've been trying to explain intermittently that this idea of collective authoritarianism is the actual outworkings, the actual implementation, the strategy, if you will, whatever word you want to use, of communistic mentality, or also of an empire, a corrupt empire or a corrupt communism. They both use a collectivistic authoritarianism, right? They want to own everything, control everything, and decide what's good for you. They just start their approach to that form of government from two different positions. Empires start from the top down. Communism starts from the people, which is the bottom up. The people either that rule as princes and kings and emperors, that's the top down. The working class is the bottom up. Communism addresses and goes after the bottom up to create the revolution over those who rule over them. And then once rule is established for that new people group, it's the same empiric collectivistic authoritarianism that's used. It's just communism is a direct correlation to what Nimrod did at the Tower of Babel. Whereas empiric rule is just a twisting, a perversion of what the Son of God is going to do during the millennial reign, where he's going to be like an emperor, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, to rule over the people fairly with justice, as the Torah goes forth from Zion, Isaiah 2:2-5. And everyone has to abide by Torah and learn Torah, because that is the best way for humanity to live, because it's the Creator's behavior. So collectivistic authoritarianism, as in our country today, is we've had decades and decades of communistic ideals and influences being implemented into our society through policies, political policies, like I went over intersectionality, which is a branch of feminism. We've had feminism for a long time, which is just a communistic push to create division. And we also have the media, which I talked about the media. Stalin said the media is the sharpest weapon of communism. And we see the American media promoting communistic ideals and policies. We also see American collegiate academia, right? This is kind of like it's become so well known. It's kind of like a byword among certain social circles in the United States, is that you don't send your kids to certain colleges because they're just going to get like communistic indoctrinated training from these professors that are there. Well, that was done in the 60s. That was intentionally implemented through the 60s. And my wife probably knows the guy's quote. I don't remember the guy who quoted, but he was actually someone that defected from the Soviet Union. And he said, we're just going to get into the higher learning academies and we'll teach all their children. I'm paraphrasing, but he said, once we get into the higher learning academies, we'll just teach all the children communism, basically. So then generations down the line, those people are now politicians and they're voting in communistic ideals because that's the lens from which they see the world. They're looking for segmentation. They're looking for sectors and regions of groups and peoples and classes, divisions, and they assume someone's being oppressed and we got to fix it, because they're deceiving people to think they're doing great things all the while they're doing horrific things. So it's everywhere in the American society. If you go look up online the top 10 communist ideals for governance, you'll see that America has adopted 8 out of the 10 of them already. And I talked about earlier about property tax. That's one of them. I talked about, the agenda 2030 and some of the top goals of that. And one of them was to control the food population. Another one was to control the educational system. That's been happening for 100 years in the United States. The USDA, the FDA, we have the Department of Education. All that's controlled by the state. It's all controlled by the government, the federal government. That's communism. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but this is a study of political science. You just have to be willing to call a spade a spade. So I'm giving you a quick summary. Go back and check out the whole video in case you just got here. But hopefully that's a decent short answer for you. Bobcat's Droid, no, I haven't heard of General Order 100. I'm sorry, I haven't heard of that. Estevan, you, your family, and your extended family, your friends, your community, all of that's worth fighting for, of course. Getting to a place where you're idolizing a flag or a specific geographical boundary, that can get you into some trouble, right? That lends towards strange nationalism, which is where 1930s Germany got itself into some trouble with that mentality. But fighting for a principle from God's word that can be applied to you and your family and to the people in your region, your area that are a part of your community, that is worth fighting for. That is worth sharing those practices of the Creator's behavior, which will produce the best outcome and will have the most loving form of justice. That is worth fighting for. This is what the Maccabees fought for. This is what David fought for. This is what Abraham fought for. That is what Yeshua will fight for when he returns. So just keep in mind, you have to, judge each point of conflict within the context of what you're looking at. But ultimately, hopefully your backdrop is God's instructions, his principles, his precepts, his judgments, and how to love yourself and your neighbor, and how that implements through his word, because he explains it through his word, right? That is worth fighting for. Those principles will create the best for everyone around you. That's worth fighting for. And those principles, according to the Bible, are never told to us to force them on other people. We always let people do what they want to do, and we abide by those principles on ourselves and lovingly teach them those principles, but we never force them to abide by those principles. That's where the Roman Catholic Church came in and tried to smear the name of what it means to be a follower of Jesus Christ, because they tried to force principles. Most of them weren't even biblical anyway, but they tried to force what they called Christian principles onto other people groups and just create animosity and hatred and warfare. And you know what I'm saying? So this was, again, you have to take everything in the context of the conflict. What is the conflict that's happening? Who are the players involved? What's the grievance? What's going on? This is where you can better judge those conflicts the more that you have the word of God in you, his instructions, his commandments, because it'll increase your wisdom to be able to judge amongst those matters. This is why in Exodus chapter 18, Moses chose elders amongst the people. I think it's in verses 20 through 22. He chose elders among the people who could delegate and understand the word of God and then teach it to others and judge disputes amongst the people, so that you would have the word of God, his perfect instructions being taught to all the people and settling disputes to create peace. So that principle applied to you and everyone around you as far as you can reach is worth fighting for, but it's not worth forcing on others, because that's an individual choice and whether they want to abide by that behavior or not. So I'm trying to hit several different angles with your question. It's a good question. And that's how I view applying God's word in this crazy, wicked world we live in, and all the different scenarios involved, and how to be as wise as possible in doing that, and as biblically accurate as possible. So hopefully that helps you. Sorry for the long answer. Guys, I'll take a couple more. We're here almost at 2 hours, so I'm going to take just a couple more questions and we'll stop for tonight. April Lifton, think about, you're asking, does it matter what party runs this country? Think about what I just read tonight from Daniel 4 with Nebuchadnezzar. He was king of the known world, man. I mean, he was that guy. He ruled everything in the known world. Except for China. Like, he was the Babylonian Empire over 127 different provinces. That's all of Europe. That's most of Africa. That was parts of India. That was actually, it was most of India. That was everywhere. He was all these different places. And God got to him. Same thing with Cyrus. Same thing with Artaxerxes the second. To the point where they realize, have come to a conscious realization that the Almighty is real and that he's got their name and number, so to speak, and that they need to honor him. Now, how are they going to be judged at the resurrection? I don't know. I'm not going to speak for Yeshua. That's his job. But the Father can get to anybody. So, yeah, still pray for your country. Pray for your people that are in leadership over you, whether you voted for them or not. We do our best. Yeah, sometimes you poke fun at them because you're like, you don't agree with what they're doing. But ultimately, we don't wish anyone ill harm, right? We want justice to happen. And so we pray that God brings justice through wisdom to our leaders. And that's, I guess, the best I could offer. Instead of getting caught up in the, which party are you going for? Think about what we just talked about. The word party itself is huge amongst communists. They want you devoting yourself to a party. So devote yourself to ideals, the principles in the Word of God. Pray those over your leaders and just trust in the Father. Because ultimately, like we read from Nebuchadnezzar or from Daniel chapter 4, let me put this back on screen, guys, because this is something I have to remind myself when I get really caught up in the political, drama of the day, right? The what we call the political soap opera of our modern times. I've always been interested in governance and politics, even from when I was in high school, when I was younger, and it just something that came easy to me. I understood it easily, and so it's easy for me to get sucked into politics, basically, is all I'm trying to say. And I have to remind myself of this verse that I'm going to put on screen for you, because this verse, it's something that's it's true. I just have to remind myself and trust the Father that this is what's happening every single time. Let me get back to it real quick. This is one of their presentations tonight. It was like 100 slides. All right, so here it is. I'll put it on screen for us. So this is in Daniel 4, 28 through 34. If you look down the middle of this, and it says, this is when Nebuchadnezzar is being driven mad. And it says, 7 years will pass over you until you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomsoever he will. So this is a lesson that Nebuchadnezzar had to be taught. This is a lesson that I think all of us could remember, is that the Most High rules of the kingdoms of men and gives it to whomsoever he wills. Does this mean that we follow the rules of evil men that are not abiding by the Creator's behavior? No, of course not. The book of Daniel itself is full of examples of, the three Hebrews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and also Daniel standing up against even Nebuchadnezzar, the same dude. They're standing up against Nebuchadnezzar saying, no, we're not going to do your practices, the practices of Babylon. We're not going to do those. We're not going to eat your diet. We're not going to worship your idols. And the Father protected them amidst bad rulership, amidst Babylonian rule. But even the Babylonian king ruler had to realize who truly gave him that kingdom. So this is where we have to trust the Father, right? For all the people that died when Nebuchadnezzar invaded Jerusalem, which we see in 2 Kings, I think it's chapter 23, 2 Kings 23, and I think it's also in the Apocalypse of Baruch, chapter 4 through 7. When Nebuchadnezzar invades Jerusalem, Baruch is the Apocalypse of Baruch. Baruch, the priest, is freaking out. He's like, "What? Who's going to teach your law to the people if you let us be extinguished?" And at that time, you had people being taken into exile into Babylon, and Yahweh's just trying to comfort Baruch, through the message sent through the angel to say, "It's okay. I've got this. You worry about you. Go into captivity and just keep my law, even in captivity." And this is exactly what we see Daniel doing, who was a contemporary of Baruch. This is exactly what we see Ezekiel doing, who was a contemporary of Daniel and Baruch. They kept the law in enemy territory. This is our job, and this is our trust that we give to the Father, that he is going to figure this out. And even when there's people ruling over us that we don't like, and they're not doing his behavior, we have to remember there's millions upon millions of angels that he sends out to work in the affairs of mankind and also in governance. We see that also in the book of Daniel. So this is hopefully give you some encouragement. Even when people take over, whether they get elected or whether they steal elections, it doesn't matter. Even when people come to power, just like back in the day, a lot of people think the current election was stolen. It wasn't done through bloodshed. Back in the day, Nebuchadnezzar came in because he killed his way to the top. There was no election. He took over because he killed everybody and took over. And then he went and destroyed all the nations surrounding Israel and took Israelites into captivity. We didn't have to face that. We had a transition of power where, one guy that half the people like ruled for a while, and now another guy's ruling that half the people like. So it's like we got to trust that the Father's in control, and this is what I have to remind myself all the time. So hopefully that's some encouragement to you, sister. Okay, let's see one more question, and my voice is going out. Bobcat Story, go check out my previous podcast where I talk about self-defense, scriptural self-defense, and I've gone over this. I did a whole episode on this, brother. I think it'll encourage you. I am not one. I'm going to give you a quick summary, okay? I'm not one that's going to lay down. I'm more of a David or a Maccabean, okay? Because I feel like we're in the context of that time period. We're not in the context of the time period of the disciples, who are already extremely subjugated by the Romans. So we're in a different context, and the same principles apply, but context matters on how you apply the principles, right? So I believe we're more in a situation of David or the Maccabeans, and we have an invading force that whether subtly or overtly is trying to overcome people that want to live by good principles. So the people who live by good principles should fight for those principles when that fight comes to your city, your town, or your doorstep. Go check out my playlist here on Kingdom Cast. And it was like 3 months ago, and I can't remember the title of it right now. Mods, if you guys remember, please put it in the comments. But it's you'll see it. It literally has in the title self-defense in the title of the broadcast. And there's a guy with a blindfold, and he's like praying about to be martyred. And so I go over it for like an hour and a half. So hopefully that'll help you. All right, guys. I appreciate everyone being here tonight. I gotta cut out. We're almost at 2 hours here, and you guys are awesome. Thanks for participating. Thanks for all your support, whether it's prayers, whether it's encouragement through chatting with me through these podcasts, or some of you guys, y'all use the support links through PayPal and Patreon, and you support us like that. If you want to keep us going, or you want to be a patron, you're welcome to use the link below. I appreciate everybody for what you're doing. I apologize if you've written me a letter and I haven't had time to get back to you. We get a lot of messages and letters, and I cannot get back to every single person. So the best way is currently, until Lighthouse comes out, is Facebook. We have it's in the video description of these videos. We have a Facebook group, and you can come in there and ask questions. And that's just the way the notifications work with Facebook. It's better than YouTube. It's better than MeWe. Hopefully, we're trying to make Lighthouse just as efficient with the notification system. But if you have a question, that's one of the best ways that you can get it answered, is come into that Facebook group. And then there's already like 1,700 people in there, I think. And you can have a higher chance of getting your question answered, or join me for another live chat as we do these broadcasts for Kingdom Cast. So I appreciate everybody. Hope you have a great night, and we'll see you next time.